Hello, everyone. Welcome to NALO's Thrift Talk. We have a really just information-packed episode today that is all about sewing patterns. And I know, Nadine, you posted about our show today on the thrifting board, and it got a ton of people commenting saying, oh, I have a huge lot of them to go through. So I hope that we can help a ton of people figure out what they've got and learn how to source for sewing patterns in the future. And this is, like usual, our show is geared a little bit more towards resellers, but we do really try to have information that anyone who loves thrifting can use. So that is our goal for today's show. Absolutely. And if you're a first-time viewer, I'm Lola.
And I'm Nay.
And we are thrifters and resellers on eBay, Poshmark, Depop, sort of all over the internet, and we love thrifting. So we try to integrate thrifting into our own sustainable lifestyle, and it helps us to, you know, make our ends meet and have sort of flexible schedules, and then also to make ourselves just feel a little bit more responsible for the earth. So anything you want to add, Nay?
No, that's pretty much it. And, you know, we also talk about, you know, the sentimentality of items and how, you know, it can go beyond just, you know, we're not just about, you know, making a profit. It can go beyond, like, there can be there's like a non-monetary value on things.
Yeah, like history and
exactly.
Stories in every item. Absolutely. So every week we do a couple regular segments, and we will start off as usual with what thrifted items are we wearing? So Nadine, why don't you go first?
Okay, so actually, technically, this isn't, well, my headband's thrifted, and my earrings are vintage. They are sterling silver. They are clips, which I didn't pay attention to. I ordered them from Shop Goodwill. Didn't pay attention to, but I still love them, and I still wear clips. I don't care. But yeah, they're really pretty. They have like all this intricate detail. They're vintage. And then my top is actually not thrifted, but it's thrifting related because it's Tycoon for Target. So it's one of the 20th anniversary collaborations. So
very cool. And that tie-dye print is so cool.
Yes. Yeah, it's hot today, so it's kind of comfortable.
So I'm also wearing something from Shop Goodwill. This is a Free People, it's a linen blend jumpsuit. It goes all the way down. It can stand up. There is a belt that came with it, which I did not put on.
Oh, that's adorable.
Isn't it cute? It has like really deep pockets.
Wow.
And I think it's a medium, so it's one of those Free People pieces that I took a little risk on, but it is oversized except for the sleeves and the legs.
Is it shorts or is it long pants?
It's long pants, but the pant length is like a little short on me. So when I was putting this on earlier, I was thinking maybe I'll add like a trim, like a ribbon or a lace to the bottom to make it look a little bit more intentional, or I might actually shorten them so that they look like intentionally short. Because I feel like right now they're a little in between, but I'm very happy with it. This is definitely gonna be like a summer staple. And I think I paid like $8 or $12 somewhere in there on Shop Goodwill, and I'd added it in with another item that I purchased.
That's the best
with the shipping cost. So yeah, very happy with that.
Cool.
And
you both had Shop Goodwill items on.
Yeah. Funny, I actually haven't been shopping on Shop Goodwill as much as usual, given that we can't go thrifting.
I know.
But I think it's partially because the prices there are like higher than normal, and so it's harder to justify that. Plus,
exactly, yeah.
So I'm really, really itching to do some thrifting, but I'm going to wait until it is safe and things are reopened. But home decor.
Yes.
So Nadine.
Yes.
I see some fabric behind you, or is that a?
Oh, behind me, that's actually a scarf. It's a silk scarf. So cool. It is hand rolled. It's 100% silk. It's vintage, but it doesn't have a brand on it. But it's that equestrian theme. So I just put that up for my background today.
That's a great background.
Not my home decor, but my home decor item is this guy, who is. I got him at the Goodwill that's in my region now. It's the New York City region, and he is I got him like a while ago, like probably like a year ago.
Mhm.
But the reason that I picked him up, he's actually a clown. He looks kind of like a leprechaun, but he's a clown. The reason I picked him up was because I paid $5.99, as you can see. I think he was half off though, so I remember. So I probably paid like $3. I couldn't leave him behind because of this. It says Coco Clown, hand knitted in Wales by Sonia.
That's so cool.
So I just couldn't, like, I knew that, you know, he was hand knitted in Wales. Somebody had, whoever Sonia is, she had put all this time. I mean, look at all the time look at his legs, or everything's all knitted.
Mm-hmm.
And you as a knitter would know that this took somebody a lot of time.
Yeah, that's also, it's all of the little pieces and stuff. That's more advanced knitting. That's a real kind of work of art. And it's one of those pieces, I think, that in parts of like Ireland, Scotland, Wales, where there's a real like sheep history, like knitted garments also made from the local sheep, that those tourist pieces are a way that some women really make, you know, their living. So it's a cool piece of art, and also to, you know, recognize that there's people who still make, you know, make a living off of things made by hand. So I think that's
right.
really cool.
I don't understand the comment there. What is it?
Well, you know, I'm sure she had a very good reason for robbing the bank. So
yeah, okay. All right.
And I just want to pause real quick to say hi to everyone in the chat. We have a great audience today. Lots of people seem really excited to talk about sewing patterns just like we are. So
yes, and I have a bunch of examples here too, which I'm trying to sort out here. So started, Lola?
Yeah, so my item today is something that I showed on one of our very first episodes, I think. And it is this frame, which I bought at a really cool, one of those like little vintage antique shops where it's totally dusty and like you have to hunt through everything, and it feels like an adventure to climb over all the piles of books and, you know, like tons of its junk. And then every now and then you find something that is incredibly valuable. And the downside to this little shop, which unfortunately is now closed, is in Philadelphia, but the guy who ran it was just like an encyclopedia. So he knew what everything was worth, even though it was like, it felt like everything had been forgotten. He knew every single item in that store off the top of his head. It was incredible to talk to him. And so I had a great conversation with him. And then I bought this frame, which is pretty big, as you can tell. And then I had to carry it all the way home. So I had like over my shoulder and walked down, you know, like 15-minute walk back to my house. But from the very beginning, I thought it would make a really cool frame for a bulletin board. And then I tried to figure out like the right size and just never got around to finishing it.
Very cool though.
And so finally, I bought a bulletin board, mounted it to the wall with command strips, and then we have picture railing all around like every room in our house. So I used the picture railing to hang the frame in front of the bulletin board. And I'm just really, really pleased with how it turned out.
I like it. It's cool. Nice little DIY project.
Very simple, but great way to utilize one of my favorite thrift finds. Dee says, I feel like a bank robber when I go out. Yeah, it's definitely something to get used to have your face covered.
Yes, and now you have to go into a bank with a mask covering your face. So.
Okay, so it's time to move on to our main segment, which I know you are all super excited for today, which is all about sewing patterns. Mm-hmm. And I thought we could start with a couple reasons why we love sewing patterns, which I'm sure a lot of people in the chat and watching this afterwards can agree with. And that's just why they're such a great thing to sell on eBay or Etsy. They're basically the ideal item to flip, because when you find them, they're either pretty cheap, like my local thrift used to have them for 25 cents. And there's one thrift near where I live now that's 50 cents. So like seriously breaking the bank there. You can often find a big box at the estate sale, and they'll sell it.
They're often like bagged too. Like I find them at like Goodwill and all in big, huge bags. They just bag them all together. So
yeah. And it sort of feels like panning for gold for me, because it's like, you know, that in that big bag, there might be one or two that are just like out of the park.
Exactly.
But even some duds that might just not be worth anything, and then lots that are $10, $15, which when you're paying $5 for a huge bag of patterns, you really can't go wrong with that. So it's like that treasure hunt that has no downside. They are super easy to store. So one of my favorite things to do is I have this. This is the size Amazon box that they fit in pretty much perfectly. So they're, and they're very small, so you can have a large number of items in your inventory stored in a fairly small place.
I keep them in in those big Rubbermaid tubs, and I can fit hundreds in one. So
and they're super easy to research because pretty much everything you need to know to list them, even if you're not a sewer, even if you've never touched a sewing machine, it's either on the envelope of the pattern itself, or it's fairly easy to find with a Google search. So there's not a huge learning curve. It's definitely helpful to know some of the things that we're going to talk about in this video today, but you don't have to be a hands-on crafter to be able to really do well with sewing patterns.
And occasionally someone will ask you a sewing related question, but you can easily find the answer and back to that. It's not
and on the topic of asking questions, one of my favorite parts of this is that the buyers who buy sewing patterns are just really cool, creative people. So they're going to appreciate the history of the pattern. They might be buying it to actually make something to wear. So they're, really getting the most out of an item that might have been sitting and collecting dust for decades. And often they will have interesting stories or interesting connections to the pattern that I always get like really great messages when I'm selling patterns saying, oh, I'm buying this to make a dress for a wedding or something. And it's just, there's more of that narrative that comes with selling patterns that I love about thrifting and selling online. So
definitely.
Nadine, you want to do the honors for a brief overview of the history of
sure. So we're just gonna go into this briefly because we have a lot to talk about today. But before the mid 19th century, so clothing was all sewn by hand, but sewing patterns weren't introduced until the 1850s. So that's when they officially, and there were 4 historic companies that still exist today. There are there's others that have gone defunct, and we're going to talk about some of them, but the 4 that still exist are Butterick, McCalls, Simplicity, and Vogue. And McCalls actually was McCall before it became McCalls. So this is a vintage one from the 40s, I believe, or 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
It's a skirt pattern.
Early 50s if it's 50.
Yeah, I think it's early 50s, early 40s. So this is one that actually says McCall. And it says, now the older ones also said printed. I'll get into that. But because originally they were not printed, but you can see this is a really old pattern. But
yeah, I realize I have one in my collection too. So this one's in pretty bad shape. You can see where it says McCall printed pattern. And the reason why it says printed pattern is because
they were not printed originally. So this is an example of a Vogue pattern now that unfortunately this paper is just disintegrating. But this is one from, I believe it's from probably the 40s, late 30s, early 40s, maybe.
Yeah, from the illustration, yeah.
So it is, you can see that this paper is it's just disintegrating. It's a shame. So they had the information on the back, and here is this is the instructions for it. However, and this is still factory folded, which we'll talk about, there's nothing on it. So they're all cut into the shapes of, and I don't really want to unfold it because I might try to sell this one, but they are all cut into the shapes of the pattern when they were.
I actually have one here that, again, because of the age, the envelope has sort of come apart.
That's what, they started to the paper just kind of disintegrate.
And this one definitely was used. It's well folded, but someone did sew from it. And so this is what the pattern pieces look like.
Mine is still not, nobody.
Yeah. It's the same type of tissue paper that you see in later patterns, but it actually has no lines on it to cut out. It already came in the right shape. And then it has these little punches, which is how you know how to line up different patterns. So they're a little bit more complicated for modern sewers to use just because we're not used to that anymore.
They're also highly collectible.
But they are highly collectible, highly desirable. Definitely.
So William Jennings Demarest and Ellen Louise Demarest began the home sewing pattern industry in 1860. They held fashion shows in their homes and sold the patterns. So they were on printed paper, like we just showed, cut to shape, and they could be purchased flat, folded, or for an additional charge made up with the separate pieces tacked into position. So that's where you would see those pinholes. They would pre-assemble them for you. And then Ebenezer Butterick, which is the famous Butterick company, in 1863, he created a heavy cardboard templates for children's clothing. They're originally just children's. Yes, I have a bunch of vintage Buttericks too here. Actually, this is interesting too. I just pulled this one. So this is a McCalls from a little bit later in the 50s, maybe early 60s. And you can see there, 1960, I'm sorry, the back of the envelope says 1960. So you can see the difference there. Now it says McCalls with a plural. So, anyway, Butterick's innovation was offering every pattern in a series of standard graded sizes. So, and then members of his family cut and folded the first patterns that were sold from their home. And in 1948, they started printing patterns. So, if you have that helps you with the dating on. And then James McCall established McCall Pattern Company in 1870 in New York City. They were unprinted until 1919. And they were the only company to print dates on their patterns before the mid-century. Like, for example, this pattern that I have, it's dated 1960. It's printed, it's right on the back. You can see 1960 there. So, and dating hint is a bit, the McCall versus the McCalls we had just talked about. So that's a big difference there. And then the Vogue pattern service began in 1899, and it was a spinoff of Vogue magazine's weekly pattern feature. In 1909, Condé Nast bought Vogue, and Vogue Pattern Company was formed in 1919. And then in 1916, the patterns were sold in department stores. So Vogue patterns and Vogue knitting were once related to the Vogue magazine. So that's where the name came from. And for a long time, they would be cross-referenced, like a Vogue model would be making a Vogue pattern. You could see it at the store and make it at home. Or in a Vogue knitted sweater, they'd be paired with a skirt made from a Vogue pattern. So today, they're not anymore owned by Condé Nast, but they're still focused on more high fashion, current looks instead of the timeless classics. So, and then Simplicity was founded in 1927. They were made to be easier to use, lower priced, and they were unprinted until 1946. So that helps you to date. And then there's some other pattern companies that don't exist anymore, but are highly collectible. And there's there's others. These are just some of the main ones that I'm going to mention. Dubari was manufactured by Simplicity from 1931 to 1946, exclusively for Woolworths, which was a discount store that just is no longer in existence. And they went out sometime in the 90s, I think. And then the Halloween pattern.
Very different.
Hollywood Pattern Company was started by Condé Nast in 1932, and they're known for printing photos of Hollywood stars on some of their patterns, and out of business in 1946. The art on those envelopes is highly collectible. So a lot of people do collect those for the envelopes. And then the New York Pattern Company started in 1932, and it ended in the 1950s. The sleeves had drawn characters instead of photos, which was kind of a new thing then. And the paper used was non-glossy. So that kind of pioneered the look today that you see. And then Advance began manufacturing patterns in 1933, which was sold only at JCPenney until 1966. And you have to remember that back then, JCPenney was not considered it was more upscale than it's considered today. So so those vintage patterns. So there's some examples of some of the Dubari and the Hollywood. The preview collection, that was Dubari, and then there's an example of one of the Hollywood patterns. And that's a sold comp. That lot of 3 sold for $30. So, but
this isn't even the whole pattern, right? This is just the
that's just the leaflet. That's not the actual. So yeah, so that's an example of the art being highly collectible. And then, like I mentioned do you have any of the other photos of some of the, yeah, some of the other ones so yeah, as I mentioned, the actual art is very collectible, but those patterns are very, the patterns are very collectible too. So those leaflets sold for $30, but I saw some of the patterns, like depending on what it is, the patterns sell for quite a bit. Yeah. So here's some of the New York patterns. One sold for 40, 20, 19 plus. And a lot of these, you'll see some of these they do auctions on some of the more collectible ones. I think some of if you really know what it's worth, though, I think the buy it now prices seem to get more unless you have something incredibly collectible. So
yeah, I'm surprised that this top one went for only like $17 at auction. I wonder if you had done like $50 best offer.
Maybe. I'm gonna have to let the dog in the room. I'm sorry.
I can take over for a little bit.
Yeah, you can just.
Okay, so we're talking a lot about vintage patterns because obviously those are not available in stores anymore. They're the ones that buyers are more likely to go to eBay or Etsy to buy. But of course, sewing patterns today can also be a good pickup if you find them at the thrift store. So one thing that is good to keep in mind is that, like with all crafting, the internet has changed everything. So one trend that has really changed the sewing pattern industry is that indie designers are able to sell their patterns in digital PDF format. And that means that, you're not going to find those, you can't resell them, but occasionally you will find an indie pattern that is a modern pattern that, was printed. And those can be, that's a great example. So yeah, you can tell it doesn't have a major brand logo on it. It looks like something that's a little bit more.
And this has the original price. It's like one of those boutique-y kind of stores. You can tell by the price tag. It was $15 originally, and this one is going for about it's still holding a good $15 to $20. Depending on what where you're selling it, but
right. Yeah. So, they may or may not be worth a lot depending on the following of the designer, but it's worth picking up and then, checking because they can be a good flip. And one thing that the internet has made more possible is working from vintage patterns to make a garment that's fit for a modern size body. So that means that there's a lot more people who do feel confident to buy a vintage pattern and know that they're probably going to do quite a bit of work to grade it, to make it the right size for them. But that also means that even if you have a super tiny pattern, bigger sizes definitely are more sought after, but a small size, a petite vintage size pattern can be graded up to a modern, size body.
Yeah.
So that means that it does. So people who are buying vintage patterns are not necessarily looking for the size that fits them because they know that they're going to make it.
And we're going to touch on this too, but vintage sizes, of course, for those of you who don't know, they run smaller than, so like a vintage size 14 might have been like maybe like a modern size 4, it's very different. The sizing, is very, very different. So, I've seen some that are marked 12 and they have a 32-inch bust,
Yeah, so this is a size 14, 34-inch.
A 34-inch bust, which is, modern day, that's pretty tiny.
That's like a 2-4.
Yeah, exactly. So big difference.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that's great about vintage sewing patterns, especially sewing patterns in general, is that there are multiple audiences who are looking for them. So there are, of course, the people who are buying vintage patterns to actually make the garment and use them. That means that they're more likely to forgive small flaws. So, even this pattern here where the envelope is completely disintegrating because it's older, and I haven't double checked that all the pieces are here, but it looks like they probably are, in a second that they are. This pattern in this condition might still be of interest to a crafter or sewer because the envelope is not going to keep you from using this to make a dress. So that's, something that is, in other niches, something like that kind of damage might be a no-go, but for this, it's probably okay. Then there are collectors, and those collectors are looking for absolutely pristine versions of the copy. So if you do have a pristine pattern that is a more rare and older pattern, it can go for quite a bit of money. And among those collectors are actually the companies themselves, because a lot of these pattern companies, like the big four, which are the main companies that we were talking about, that Nay was going through the history that still exists today, they didn't keep good archives. And so they are going on Etsy, going on eBay, buying back some of these old patterns that they don't actually have a copy of themselves. And because of the interest in vintage patterns, a lot of these companies, like Simplicity, you know, is one of them, are issuing what they call like a retro version, a repro version of their older patterns, and sizing them up to modern sizes and making some adjustments to make them look a little less dated. But so in order to do that, they also need copies of their old patterns. So there's lots of reasons why a more collectible pattern can go for quite a bit more money.
And crafters also reuse parts. There's artists, art, people that like to frame the art, you know. So crafters use them too, because the envelopes are actually, it's a form of artwork. They're awesome, you know. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's another group of people who might be willing to look over some flaws, because if, you know, someone is planning to use the envelope as part of a collage art piece, then they don't mind that a pattern piece is missing, or they don't mind that
it's ripped or something. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And of course, now during this, you know, we're still dealing with a pandemic and mostly living in quarantine, there has been a huge surge of interest in home crafting. And some of it is also related to the movement to making masks. So a lot of people have bought sewing machines for the first time, or taught themselves to sew in order to make masks and realized they really enjoyed it. So right now, this is a great time to be listing patterns, because there's a ton of new people looking for their first patterns to try out, and you know, they're only looking online because, of course, it's difficult, if not impossible, to get to stores right now. So this is, you know, the prime moment to be listing. So
yeah, and people also that are already regular sewers, now they have the time to be doing, you know, what they want, and people are also learning. And like you said, Lola, you know, this might continue. You know, people might now have taught themselves to sew, or they might really have, you know, learned to make the masks and they want to get into sewing. And so, you know, it might create kind of a continued uptick even after the pandemic eases up. You know, it might continue. You know, more people might have gotten into this that might want to continue sewing, you know, in their
absolutely. Yeah, I definitely think that this is going to be a lasting impact. So even when we, you know, start leaving the house again, that there are going to be new people who are completely committed to keeping up this new hobby of theirs, because they just found so much, you know, enjoyment out of it and had the time to learn. And so that's going to keep us going forward.
Try to get my dog in the here.
Hi, Paddington.
You see him now?
I see his paw.
Yeah, he's not. He's right here. And I tell you, my kids are being good. If it's not the kids, it's the dog. So,
as we've said before, this is a kid and pet friendly show. So
come in and bark. It's like, so I have to constantly pet him. If I don't have my hand on him, he'll start barking. So sorry about that.
Quarantine life. Everything's a little bit more complicated.
Yes. Yeah, because usually, like, I would go over, my parents would watch the kids for an hour, I'd go over there, I'd go upstairs. They have, you know, I'd have the whole upstairs to myself, and I'd have, like, my own little private studio, quiet, no dog, no kids. Can't do that now, so a lot. There he is.
Oh, look at that face.
There's my boy.
Hi. What a handsome boy, Paddington.
Yeah, he's a good boy. He's just very, very... Okay, so, yeah, so... And then there's also, I wanted to mention sewing pattern related items too. Just touch on that really quick. Sorry. Sewing pattern catalogs and cabinets. Yeah, so there's.
Yeah, so this is amazing. I can imagine that this is, you know, probably a little bit of a slow mover because you're not going to ship that, but these items are definitely collectible. We won't go through it too much on this episode, but sewing notions, sewing machine parts, I think we've mentioned that before. Things like that are also worth picking up and reselling because people are looking for those things, especially right now. Also, I did notice, as I've noticed, this is a trend I'm noticing when we're researching these episodes, that the books that go really in depth on a very niche subject almost always are good to pick up and are going to be a good flip. So for sewing, there's a book called, this up in our notes. It's called Blueprints of Fashion, Home Sewing Patterns of the 1940s. It is out of print, and it is a book that goes into detail on some of the as it says, the decade 1940s. Those patterns are still a little bit harder to get information on Googling online. So there's still a reason to have that resource. And all of the comps I could see on that book were $20 and up, depending on the condition and the actual printing, of that copy. So if you see that at a thrift store for, $1, $2, that's definitely probably a good pickup there too. So I thought that we could walk through a couple patterns as if we were researching them ourselves and sort of show everyone how to do it, because it is really simple, even if you know nothing about sewing.
Yeah. So you want me to pull one of mine, or do you have one?
Sure. Well, I had one example that I had gone through, but I thought it'd be fun to do one kind of randomly too. So why don't you
pull? Should I pull a vintage one? I guess I'll.
Yeah.
Okay, so here we go. Simplicity.
Okay, cool. So looking at the art, you can kind of tell the style is going to tell you a general date just right off the bat. And then it does say printed pattern. So you know a little bit about the date from that as well. So I'm guessing that this is early 60s.
I think it's actually probably late 50s based on this style, the plaid dress.
Good point. Yeah.
I with the gloves, I feel like it's probably more like late 50s. And it's yeah. So this is also, notice this too, size 16, bust 36. 50 cents. That also does help, the price on it, because I have some here. It might be early 60s because I have some here that are definitely 50s, and they are 25 cents, 35 cents. So 50 cents, maybe it is very early 60s, but the style still has that 50s kind of echo. So we're looking at late 50s, early 60s.
So does it have a date on the pattern itself?
No, it's on the pattern itself inside, or no, I don't.
It should be on the edge of if it's on the pattern envelope, it'll be somewhere on the edge or the very bottom.
Oh, no, it's not on the envelope, no.
Okay, and then it may be on the inside instructions.
Yeah, I think McCalls was the only one that really put the date on them early on. Yeah, I don't see a date on it anywhere.
So right. So sometimes they will have.
Here it is. Okay, 1958.
Oh, good call. Late 50s.
Yep. So I was right. So
I was thinking 60, 61.
Yeah, I was thinking late 50s just because of the gloves and the style and that plaid dress. See, if you know your styles of fashion, you can kind of judge. So yeah, 1958. So there we go.
Okay, so now we want to look at the condition of the overall pattern. So we've saw the envelope's in good shape, right? Are there any major flaws?
There's a little tear in here, right here. But, I would just close that. What I do is I take close pictures of all of the flaws and just take a close picture of the envelope. I take a picture of the back, but then I also will, we're going to talk a little more about pictures, but I will also kind of close in on this information here.
Yes, definitely.
So that they can see, the size chart and all of that information.
So are the pieces of this pattern cut or uncut?
They are uncut. It is still factory folded, which means that it's nice and crisp, and you can see that hasn't been, messed with. The edges aren't cut. So this is factory folded and uncut.
So those are two important terms when listing, because that will be a slight benefit. It will be worth a little bit more.
I think I have one here that's cut.
There are some buyers who are planning to use the pattern, don't care if it's already cut, especially if it's one of the older vintage patterns that only has one size anyway. So
Exactly.
this one, the size 14. I forget if this one is cut or not, but it, you know, if it is cut, this one looks uncut. If it is cut, it's already cut to the only size, so that won't keep someone from
Exactly
using it, and they might actually be glad that they have one less step to do. So that's not a deal breaker.
right.
Okay, so we did also talk about size and how both of these numbers are important if you're listing it. So size 14 is a vintage size. It is not a modern size 14.
You can tell that it's cut because see the edges are, it goes right up to the edge there, the piece, and it doesn't have like that overlap, even though it's nicely folded. This one is one that you might think is factory folded, but it's actually cut, and not all the pieces are cut. So some of the pieces might be cut, some of them might not be, but if you see that edge there, you can tell.
Yeah. So the most important number for this size is the bust measurement, because that stays standard, of course, for people across time. But it is important to also include the size that's labeled on the pattern, because if someone's already familiar with the specific pattern and looking for it, they might know which size they want. So both of those are important. So once you have, looked over the envelope, every detail that you can glean from the outside and inside of the pattern carefully, you can Google the name of the pattern company and the number. So here, Butterick 4004. I actually looked up this one recently, and there isn't that much on this one. So let's do yours, Nadine.
Yeah. Okay. So mine is Simplicity 2646, and it's 1958. So that's a good tip. If it's not on the envelope, it is sometimes on the instructions or the pattern itself. But
yes. So a good thing to know is that pattern companies, especially the big four, will have reused their numbers. So there may be more than one pattern that comes up under that number, which is why I like to go to the image search on Google.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. And there it is.
So when Simplicity 2646, the first one that comes up are these nightgowns. Is that yours? No, it's the dress, right?
All the way on the right, and on the bottom, it looks like mine is there. I see it on Etsy.
So the most common one for this number, though, is a different one, which is interesting because that's the older one.
There it is.
And this one is on Amazon.
Amazon. Wow, that's unpredictable.
See this one. So you can see here, not only does this give you, if we click on this, we might find a listing, but this is some good keywords to think about. Wiggle dress, rockabilly, full skirt. Here's a listing on Etsy, so we can see what the comps are here. Okay, so this one's selling for $10. You want to, okay, and it looks like it's in worse condition. So of course, when you're looking at comps, you want to consider a few things, like this one is a size 16, so it might be a little bit of more desirable size, but
mine's a 16 as well.
Oh, it is a 16. Okay, and then
with a 36 bust, yes.
Yeah, this one looks like the pattern pieces may not have been as carefully put back in the envelope since it looks a little puffy. Here's another one on eBay. And again, there are some good keywords here.
Yep. So, yeah, so you can definitely get the idea that,
So I would say, so comps look pretty, and well, there's only two here, but they're both right around the same $10.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and that's pretty good considering that these all came in one huge bag. All of these vintage ones were all lotted in one huge bag that I probably paid like $4 or $5 for. So, when you're considering that, it's just, maybe, 15, 20 cents a pattern that you're spending. So,
right. And super easy to store, super easy to ship. So,
exactly. So, yeah. So So there you go. So the size, yeah. So the size on the pattern and the bust size, which is important. But so Marianne has a question about the sizing new patterns. Well, 3 different. How do you list them? The size 14 was cut, but sizes 12 and 16 are included. I will say right in the title, cut to size. So cut to size 14, or yeah. So that's definitely important. You have to, if it is. Like Lola said, some of the ones, the older ones that are just one size, if they're cut down, it doesn't matter as much. But yeah, if it's cut down to a certain size, you need to put that right in the title and make it very, very, in fact, I wouldn't even list the other 2 sizes in the title.
But if you have a pattern that's cut to one of the larger sizes, another person could cut it smaller. Potentially, depending on how it's
one of the larger. Yeah, if it's cut to the smallest size, though, I wouldn't list large.
Right.
Or if it's cut, if it's cut to, then you can say it can also be cut down to a 12, but the 16 is, so I wouldn't add the 16. Yes,
but definitely make it very clear which size it was cut to, and look carefully at the pattern pieces to make sure that you have that correct.
Yes. Yeah. So.
Okay, so now let's pretend that we are listing this pattern. So we've talked a little bit about these details, but we can go over them again just to make, underscore what's important to buyers when they're looking at a listing. So we did our comp. So we're going to list this pattern that Nadine has for about $10. Mm-hmm. And then we are going to make sure that all the pieces are there if it is pre-cut, but this one's not. So we don't have to worry about that. Use the keywords for an uncut pattern. So we'll say uncut and factory folded, or FF is the term that people will know if they're looking for these patterns. We will add to our listing that it does have a small tear on the envelope. So that could be noted in the description, and then also maybe do a close-up photo. And then the photos for a pattern are pretty easy. So you can do photo of the front, photo of the back. Like Nadine said, the most important information is here, because this will tell the person who's using it or planning to use it how much fabric they need, what the measurements are for their size, if they're going to use the size right out of the envelope, or even if they are going to modify it a little bit, they know what the starting point is. Sometimes I will use my phone's photo editing feature to highlight the size that this pattern is, to make it very clear which one it is, the buyer's getting. And then take out very carefully the inside of the pattern and do a photo of the contents.
What I will do a lot is Paddington.
Okay, so this one is cut, so then you can also show the pieces, maybe show how well it's cut. Sometimes people will have used pinking shears to cut the edges, which is some edge attraction. So, just close that. And then for keywords, even if you don't know keywords for what the design of the garment is, you can often find them in the description of the piece. So for example, on this pattern, the back of the envelope describes it as semi-fitted low-line dress, has below the elbow or short sleeves, or is sleeveless, depending on how you make it. Has a slim skirt gathered at the hip line. So you can use these. So semi-fitted, below the elbow sleeves, short sleeves, sleeveless dress. Especially on Etsy, where you have room for a lot of keywords, you can use that description to turn it into keywords based on the style of the dress. And then you also want to include the bust and the size as keywords, of course, and the company, the pattern number, and then also if you see on other listings words that are describing it that might also spark
like A-line skirt, or something. So also, like this pattern that we were talking about, it can make a dress with 2 skirts, collar, bow, and belt. So I would try to fit as many of those in the keywords as I could without compromising other things. So I would say dress, skirt, belt. I would just as many as I could there. So
absolutely.
I'm sorry, my dog is just being a brat. He just ripped the pattern. Okay, so yeah, so also when I take the pictures too, you don't have to take it all the way out of the envelope. A lot of times I'll just do this so that I don't have to, especially
if it's factory folded. If it isn't factory folded, I would show maybe one piece so you can get an idea of how well.
Then yeah, but if they're factory folded, I'll just kind of pull it out like that and show that the instructions are there and that the pattern is factory folded. I don't necessarily take the whole thing out of the envelope when it's factory folded. But yeah, I definitely take it. And then I will take, like, since there's a tear here, I'll take a close up of that, just to kind of really point that out. And then in the back, like I said, I'll zoom. I take one like this, just like the full back, and then I will zoom in. So, yeah. So go ahead. Sorry.
One note to mention is that for Vogue patterns, so this is an example. Generally, the most valuable Vogue patterns will have been a collaboration with a designer, so you want to make sure you have that designer's name. So this is one that I picked up at the thrift store for 50 cents, as you can see on the envelope, and hopefully that will come off without too much work. When I did the comps for this pattern, I looked on Etsy and eBay, and in general, comps on Etsy will be a little bit higher, which is true for this one. So on Etsy, I saw $26 and $28 comp, and then a $24 comp on eBay. So I think I would do like $24 best offer on eBay, and then $24 on Etsy, so that I'm not shooting for the moon, but solid. I could go higher and try, but I have a lot of patterns to sell, so I'm okay with doing a more competitive price. Dee asks, is it better to sell these on eBay or Etsy? Etsy will definitely be a little bit more of a higher value. And there is, I think, a fairly, loyal group of people who are crafters who like buying on Etsy. But I cross-list, and honestly, I think that when people are looking for a very specific pattern, they're going to Google it first and not necessarily go straight to the site. So it's, it's sort of luck of the draw. I have sold patterns on both Etsy and eBay fairly well.
So yeah, so I'm going to start listing some of these patterns on Etsy, because I have not sold on Etsy yet. And this is a great thing to get in, because I am seeing that some of them are selling for more on Etsy. Some of them, you get about the same across the board, but usually Etsy does bring a little bit more. So
yeah, the downside to Etsy that I found for patterns is that they do have a listing fee every time you renew. Whereas on eBay, if you have a store, you're not going to be paying for each listing. So the difference in price, I think, in my experience, has mostly been eaten up by the extra listing fees.
Yeah, so the hot ones that you're going to sell quicker, maybe Etsy, and then the ones that are going to sit for a while, if you have a store, you can just kind of sit them in your store. The other thing with eBay is that if you have something highly collectible, you can auction it, whereas on Etsy, you cannot do that. So
yes,
the other thing. Yeah, and you can sell them on Mercari, Facebook Marketplace, Facebook groups are another thing. I think that Facebook Marketplace is probably better to source patterns from, but you can, there's certain groups too. You can look for Facebook groups that, collectors might be looking for. So that's another option.
Definitely. So for Vogue patterns, just one more note on this is that they had these labels that you could ask for in the store. And so sometimes you will find that label tucked inside the pattern. That is definitely a selling point. So you want to look for that and add it to the listing.
Yeah, I have, I don't know if now is a good time to show these. I just have some, so this is one, this is American designer John Anthony. So, this is factory fold. So you see these Vogue patterns are in bigger envelopes. These are really, some of these can go for a lot. So this is Calvin Klein. Unfortunately, envelopes ripped off, but it is factory folded in there. And this is the Coach, I'm going to butcher that word. The Couturier design is definitely, some of these can go for a lot. This one is cut. And it's going for, I did get an offer already for $17. I didn't feel that was high enough. So I countered and they didn't accept. but I have it up for about $35 right now, which is because it's cut. If it wasn't cut, it would go for a little more, but it's still, this is one of the ones that's going to go for more than some of the others. And then I have, let's see, this is Claude Montana. This is another one that's Molyneux. Let's see, and the Vogue Paris ones are also ones that you want to look for. This is Givenchy. And then Bill Glass is another one. This is from the 80s. And then this is one of the newer ones. Unfortunately, the envelope's pretty beat, but it is factory folded and uncut. So this is one of the newer American designer ones. This is Anne Klein. So you can see how the envelopes have changed. Okay. And yeah, so that tag is definitely, so you would have to go to the counter to ask for the tag.
So they're not super common, and that's why they're a great selling point, because not only did the person have to get the tag, it survived in the envelope and wasn't used. So those are, for collectors especially, that's a bonus.
Do you want to talk about shipping it then?
Yeah, so shipping's super easy. You can just stick it in a poly mailer. I would add something to strengthen keep it from bending. So piece of
cardboard is fine, yeah.
And maybe put it in a Ziploc bag to protect it from the elements. But very simple, very straightforward.
Yeah,
and definitely one of the benefits of selling sewing patterns. Super easy to list.
So I just shipped one of these those larger Vogue ones yesterday. And I happened to have in the bins, I found some, do you remember those rigid photo mailers that you have?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I found a bunch of photo mailers, and those have been great for patterns, especially the larger ones, because I didn't have to put any extra cardboard. It just slipped right in there, fit in. I did put it in a poly mailer first to protect it, and it slid in easier. And then it already had like the rigid. So that's another option. And I would, if you have something really highly expensive and collectible, then maybe I'd box it and do something,
Well,
if you're shipping like $100 pattern or something, I would do something. Yeah. But
one thing that I've done for patterns too is using the bubble mailers that Amazon uses a lot for their shipments. So once we've gotten something from Amazon, I'll cut it down to size and then just larger than the pattern itself, so then I can tape it closed carefully and then slip that into a poly mailer. And for the most part, that is, also sturdy enough. So, you can reuse a lot of shipping supplies to mail these safely, which is a nice bonus.
Sorry.
So we've talked a lot about buying lots.
Yeah.
One great thing about becoming familiar with sewing patterns is that when you see a picture of a lot on somewhere like Facebook Marketplace or Shop Goodwill, you can skim it pretty quickly and know whether or not it's something that catches your eye. So like Nadine mentioned, the Vogue patterns, which are generally worth more, come in larger envelopes. So anything that looks, not traditionally sized like this is probably worth taking a second look at. You can also tell pretty easily by the style of the artwork how old something is. So just at a glance, you can tell that this is pretty 60s, this is older. Yeah. And you saw something that looks like this in a lot, and that's another reason to take a closer look.
Yep, definitely. Yeah, so you're going to buy up lots, and you're going to have some that are kind of more duds. But what you can do with the ones that aren't going to sell for as much is you can lot those up, sell the other ones individually, and then you're still making something off of the other ones. So if you have, these are some bonus tips. If you have a huge amount of cut patterns, like they're already cut, then my advice would be to pull all the good ones out and then count the pieces. That make sure they're all there and list those individually. Then just glance through the rest and then lot those up and say, you don't have to say I didn't count all the pieces, but they're in cut condition, and because your time is money, and if they're only going to bring a couple dollars individually, they might actually bring more, after they're lotted, and it's not necessarily worth going through each one and counting the pieces, and because that's going to take a lot of time. So if you're listing some that are cut individually and they are missing pieces, then disclose what pieces are missing, because some of the pieces can be mirrored from existing pieces and recreated easily, others not so much. So definitely it's important to note specifically what pieces are missing. Don't just say missing one piece, say missing, right arm, whatever, so. And then also mention, like Lola said, if it was cut with pinking shears, because you'll see that's like the little, like the zigzag edges. And then mention what size the pattern was cut down to. If it's a one size pattern, it doesn't matter as much, but definitely know that. And if it, like Lola said, if it was cut down larger, from a larger size, like if, let's say 12, it was a 12, 14, 16, and it was cut to a 14, then you can put 14 and 12. But, no one can make a size 16 from that unless they do some serious modification work.
So this is a great tip too, that the total duds can be used as some shipping material.
Oh,
and if you have total duds, another thing you could do is save the envelopes and lock those up for like a crafter lot for, like we were talking about, people like to do that, use them for collage and framing, and then use the inside as padding.
Yeah. And so if you have a lot of uncut patterns, like a bunch of, meaning a large group of uncut patterns, and you have duplicates, then you can easily list them on eBay as or I think Etsy allows you to do multi-variation too. So yeah,
so
you can easily.
One is size 10 and one is size 12. So this is a great set for a multi-quantity listing. And they're both, I think, in the same condition. It looks like they actually have the same handwriting on the back. So someone was maybe buying this to make bridesmaids dresses or something because they have different names on them. I think these are cut. I don't remember. It's been a while since I looked at these, but even if they were, as long as they're full, if they're not missing any pieces, I might still put them as a multi-quantity listing.
Yeah, and also, when if you have a bunch of large quantity, they are easy to list. They're easy to ship. They don't take long. So, it might be worth your time, even if they're only selling, if they're all uncut, and they're in good condition, it might be worth your time to list them individually. If you have a store, let them sit, and over time, you will get a great ROI. They just might sit for a while, but it'll be a steady, consistent, profit over time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's not going to be like one big profit at once, but it'll be a nice little steady stream of sales. So.
But, do keep up on the trends, because I was noticing that my original advice that I was going to give is no longer true in terms of buying lots on eBay. So I used to buy lots on eBay all the time. Not everyone would go for a decent price, but if you waited long enough, you could find a good deal that would definitely be, it's like $1 a pattern. So maybe a little more than a thrift store, but, more, maybe easier to find, easier to gauge whether or not it's worth buying because you can see the photos. And now all of the lots that I could see comps for on eBay were going for, $75, $90, $120. So it seems like it has shifted, at least on eBay and also in Shop Goodwill. The auction, lots that are put up to auction are changing from a buyer's market to a seller's market. So it's always good to refresh a little bit. Some of this information may change because there are a lot of trends in the crafting world, and so sewing is no exception. Certain styles, certain eras, certain types of patterns are going to come in and out of
yeah. And this is also a good thing to note too, that on the flip side, since the lot prices seem to have gone up, you can get more for your lots as a seller now.
Exactly. Yes.
So don't underprice your lots either. So you can still make some decent money with the lots. And yeah, so also, and you can still get large groups at flea markets, at thrift stores, at estate sales, all of that. You can still find, large amounts of them. It just right now, of course, with the pandemic, it's a little harder to source them, but I've got tubs. Now is the time to list them if you've got them, sitting. So many people have said, oh, I have tubs of them. Now is the time to do it. So.
Absolutely. And I have seen really good deals on Facebook Marketplace right now. I was hoping to find one and, go through it and say, like, this is the profit I made. Unfortunately, people got bought them really fast. So I think right now, because they're in demand, you can find them for a good price, but you really just have to be looking all the time and message the seller real fast. So
yeah. So
Brendan says craft doll and stuffed animal patterns are big sellers. Yeah, those are definitely bolos.
We're going to talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a great segue actually into our next, which is patterns to look for. So these are just some of the ones that we will suggest, and we'll show you some comps too, but I have a few. So the Vogue designer ones, the collabs with the designers, like this one, for example. Costume. So here's an example of a costume pattern. Some of them won't go. I think this one, goes for about $10 or so, but some of them will go for a lot more. So there's a Star Wars one. Some of the Renaissance costume patterns can go for a lot. Kids costumes and adult costumes. Kids patterns, especially like girls' vintage dresses, like think like the real frilly kind of girly dresses. Those can go for a lot. Specific lines like Daisy Kingdom. I sold and I had an example there too. The Daisy Kingdom, I sold an apron pattern for, quite a bit a while ago. I think that was the same one I sold.
And this one's like a holy grail pattern.
Yeah. I think I sold that pattern actually a while back and I sold mine for somewhere in the neighborhood of $50 to $60. So, and
do you want to go through some of these comps?
Yeah, if you want to do that, and then because my kids are being loud. So
this is an example. This is not a Hollywood pattern, but one where you have a big name, a famous person who's pictured on the pattern. So that's a bolo. And this is one of the older Dewberry, out of, no longer in existence companies. So that's, a higher end pattern. The
Holy Grail, the DVF.
Yeah. And there's two Vogue DVF wrap dress patterns. One of them has the collar and cuffs, and this is the one that is more valuable. The other one does not have them, but is also obviously very collectible. And we're talking about the craft patterns and like plush toys. So this is an example of that. The Care Bear pattern. And the children's toddlers dresses can also be.
So that one also has a transfer in it. We didn't mention that. So pattern transfers are also, if something, it's like a sheet of paper, like usually it's like vellum, it's printed with blue. The transfers, if a pattern is supposed to have a transfer, even if it's factory folded, make sure that transfer is in there.
So these are some lots. And of course, a lot of Vogue sewing patterns is going to go for more, but I definitely saw one that were mixed brands that were still going for at least $75. And then Polynesian patterns. So any patterns that have a niche audience that are looking for a very specific, type of folkwear, that might be looking at more historical kind of clothing that's no longer what is, made and sold today, definitely has a following. But I think, Hawaiian clothing in general, as we've talked about, and as you will know if you follow Jason's show, like anything tiki is generally collectible.
That Polynesian pattern company was actually pretty, like they have some really collectible patterns and and they're all like vintage 60s, 70s. Yeah. So.
And then I think I skipped a couple at the beginning. So this is an example of a very rare Vogue pattern. And then, did you have the Star Wars one? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't have a start, but that was one of the ones that I had given you. So yeah, so Star Wars, any of the Star Wars costume patterns really seem to sell for a lot. And then I found a lot of these folkwear patterns, a lot of them go in lots, but they sell for quite a bit. They're from the 70s. They're very You know, they're 70s, early 80s, I think, you know.
Oh, here's the Star Wars.
Yeah, so that one, those Star Wars patterns are crazy. They go for a lot. So if you have and this is the same, it's the same pattern as, you know, it's the same line as this that I have, you know, the Simplicity costumes. It's not like a high-end pattern, but those Star Wars patterns, if you find those, you know, definitely do your research on those. So.
Mm-hmm. And then this one was painful for me because I definitely sold the same pattern. And I remember thinking, oh no, I definitely underpriced it when it went immediately. But I think I still sold it for like $60. So it wasn't like
yeah, those Lizette ones.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's certain lines that, you know, definitely do your research, because there are certain lines that will sell from, like the Daisy Kingdom is crazy. Yeah. So anything, so vintage unprinted, as we mentioned, the Hawaiian and Polynesian quilting patterns, also wedding gowns and other gowns and evening dresses are big. The small independent and artsy boutique patterns, like that one that I showed. Crafting patterns like dolls. Tracy mentioned Barbie doll, Cabbage Patch, American Doll. So any of that stuff. Characters like, you know, trademark characters like Star Wars, like, you know, like the Care Bears, like all of that stuff. Vintage, out of print, you can say OOP, and that means out of print. And a lot of these are out of print because, you know, they only make them for so long. Plus size patterns. And then there's also Berta is a German pattern company. You'll see a lot of those. There are some decent ones, but the vintage Berta pattern magazines are a bolo in themselves. So, and then also the vintage mail order ones. So originally they were just by mail order only. Here's an example of one. This still has the person's address on it and everything. It's Marion Martin is the company. The post date is right there. So you can see December 1969. And I got this one at a flea market, and it was like with a whole bunch of patterns, and I think I paid like 10 cents for it. So,
wow.
And this one, because it's in a late 60s one, some of the earlier ones, like the 40s, 50s, you know what, they'll go for more. This one is worth about 10 bucks, you know, plus shipping. So still not bad for something I paid 10 cents for. But so Marion Martin is one of the big mail order names. And then you'll see inside it has this, it has the picture of the actual, you know, like it would be on the envelope otherwise, but on those it's on because the envelope serves as also the mailing envelope. And then you can see this is factory folded. This one was printed because it was later 60s. So definitely look for those mail order patterns too, like this. If you see those in the original, and I have somewhere in my stash, and I have to find it, might be in my storage in Philadelphia, I have some more mail order patterns, and I know some of them are unprinted, so I bet those are worth something.
Yeah, so. And these are definitely some of the patterns that will be more of interest to collectors. So you want to make sure that you do have the original envelope if it comes with the pattern. Yeah, if there's a stamp on it, like Nays showed the postmark on it, that's intact, those things will matter to collectors. And then if there's, you know, promotional materials that came with the pattern, those things can also be of interest to collectors. So include details on that.
Yeah. So, okay. So also, some things that just some basic clues that a pattern is good. Just looking through, like if you're scanning a lot in the thrift store or something. So the name of the designer, collab, you know, on the label. Sometimes the patterns made with historical customers can be valuable too.
So this is an example of, again, it's like a simplicity pattern. It's not a specific niche pattern, but it is. So if you have a name of a fashion historian on the pattern, that's a good sign. So she did this line with simplicity, and this specific pattern has comps all over the place, but everywhere between like $10 and $40. So I think that the $40 ones are probably a bit high, but, you know, still I paid, I think 25 cents for this one, and it's new and uncut. So this is especially the dresses, and there's a couple dresses that are, including this one, that are out of print and are in demand among people who do like historical reenactments or who try to craft very accurate historical dresses and outfits. So that's a sort of hobby within a hobby among sewers. So these patterns can be, good to pick up in general.
So if you see the collabs, another name on it that a lot of times, like this is the Renaissance collection, but it's also, you see the name Andrea too. She's the designer. So that's another clue that it's probably, here's one, Teresa Nordstrom, it's just a simplicity, but you'll see that other name of a designer. And a lot of times that designer will have, even if it's not a well-known designer, they will have a following. So definitely look for that. And yeah, like you said, the niche audience, like the Hawaiian, like the folk, like things like that. Older looking line drawings and an illustration on an envelope are definitely like, like any of these are, you can tell by the style that this is definitely older. This is 50s for sure. And so I was going to lot all these up. I have a ton of these vintage patterns. Oh my goodness. Just so you know, like this is what I'm dealing with here.
Wow.
Yeah. So I was going to lot them up, but I think I'm going to sell these individually and just go through I think I'll probably make, even though some of them I'm not going to get as much for, some of the envelopes are in really bad shape. But a lot of them are uncut. And I think I'll end up, this is one of the best condition ones. And this one is probably 60s, but it's in such great condition that I bet I could get at least $10 for a lot of these. So
and when you pay 10-20 cents for each one, then a $10, selling
exactly price. Yeah. So, and if I was going to sell them as a lot, maybe I'd get $100, but still, I'm going to get more individually. It's going to take more time, and then the larger envelope size is another clue. Like these Vogue ones, you can see the difference in the envelope size, big difference there. So, yeah. So, and then we talked about some of the holy grails, which are some of the designers, like the Christian Dior, most of the designer Vogues. I have that Givenchy, which is going to be worth something.
I have this one's probably the most valuable pattern that's in my collection.
Oh, the Le Croix. Oh, yeah.
So there were only 2 Vogue patterns that he did, I believe, or maybe it was 3 or 4, but it was one season that there was a collab. And so these are quite rare. It was hard to find any real information or comps on them. And then I actually stumbled upon a blog where someone had already done the research and tracked down the patterns that he did. And so I think this is probably worth sellers maybe because there just really aren't any available. So this is a great example of where if I listed this, I probably would do an auction, start at like $50 or something.
But that's a good point. Don't start your auction at 99 cents. Start it at where, the lowest price that you're really willing to take. So definitely.
But I actually really want to make this. So I'm holding on to it for now.
It's beautiful. Yeah. It's one of those things that, so I have, as you can see, I have a ton of patterns to get busy listing here. And I have a whole nother tub and in my storage unit, which is still in Philadelphia, I have even more. I'm going to have to send you some, Lola. So,
I will take them.
Yeah. So here's some clues that a pattern is actually, here's some, that it's actually like a dud pattern. I lost my spot here. Yeah. So things that if it says easy or simple, like a lot of those are going to be duds. No sew. That's another one. A lot of those are duds. The brand new look, See and Sew, those are some of the dud brands. You can get them, some of them are still sold like at, I don't know, I think Walmart still sells patterns and they're like ridiculously cheap. And, so some of those, but buy them if they're in a bag with other stuff. And then you can always lot those up, if you, or put them as fillers in a lot, like Jason says with his tiki mugs, like he puts the duds in as fillers, for the lot. So you can put them as lot fillers. And so anything that says very easy Vogue, that's all going to be.
So this is one it doesn't say the very easy, very Vogue, because I think that branding is a little bit later, but it does say easy to make. And what easy to make means is that it's only a couple pattern pieces and it's not that hard for an advanced sewer to kind of figure out just from the image. So there's not as much of a demand for them. But this is an example where it might be for a lot that someone wants the art or to even use the inside for, collage piece or to frame. So it's not completely worthless, but it's definitely not going to go for as much.
And so, and then to kind of wrap it up, so we have some resources that we'll put in our description later that but basically we have there's a great research on how to date when the date isn't on the envelope. And we had talked about some of those tips, doing your research, looking at the style, clues from the envelope, like that one that I said was late 50s, I knew from the style right away that was probably, and you can tell by the drawings. And then where to look for comps, look on Pinterest is a great resource too. Pinterest has a lot of great research, and then sold on Etsy and eBay, Facebook groups. Thrifting board is always a good one. You can always tag us or, on those. And then the vintagefashionguild.org, we talk about that a lot. They have a whole resource on vintage patterns there as well. So, and then there's a vintage pattern wiki that you can, and then you found an antique pattern library?
Yeah, so there's this great website called the Antique Pattern Library, which actually has scans of different pattern books that are all in the public domain now. So they're quite a bit older, and those of course are, available freely. So they may or may not be worth something if you have that exact pattern in print. Some of them are collectible, so they would still be of interest, even though they're available for free. But it's a great way to look at the different illustrations and styles and get a better idea for some of those older styles and potentially help you date something if you have an older pattern.
Yeah, definitely.
We have some great questions. I definitely want to.
I was going to say we should go through some of the questions to wrap up, and then we'll get to our other segments.
So Deborah says, I have several Raggedy Ann and Andy transfers, but not the pattern. If you know what pattern they went to, I would either list it and carefully explain that it is the transfer only, but it corresponds to XYZ pattern.
Yep.
Or, depending on how valuable they are, which I'm not, super familiar with Raggedy Ann and Andy, so this may or may not be applicable here, but you could go and try and find the pattern without the transfers and then put them back together again, and they will, sell for more.
Yep, that's a good idea, because you can then you might be able to get the pattern itself cheaper, and then you can have a complete set and sell it for a lot more, because you're going to have an advantage that you have. Yeah, so that's that's a very good point.
Marianne says, I bought a new pattern for a wedding dress and the fabric, but then I did that too, so no judgment here. I would probably list them separately, but mention in your listing that you have either the fabric or the pattern on each listing. Yeah, and even offer, say if you want to buy both, I can do a discount, and obviously discount the shipping, so give an incentive. But because brides are extremely picky, as you probably know firsthand now, someone might want to use that pattern but have a completely different idea for the fabric. Or vice versa. Someone might already have a pattern and be looking for the fabric, and
you don't necessarily want to sell it together. That does limit your audience.
Yes, but it is good to, also, because you need different yardage amounts depending on what size, you may also want to say that you have X amount of yardage for X size on the pattern envelope. So,
I just noticed this one. As I was going through, just as a side note. So I have to look this one up, but this is from 1949. And I love the style there, but
it's so pretty.
Actually, I'm really surprised. It says bust 42, hip 45. That's pretty large in today's, for.
Yeah, this pattern, I actually forgot to mention it too. This one is the same size, and it is from the 40s. So
if you have one like that, that's vintage, definitely, highlight that that it's a larger.
And I've read tons of debates about why it is that vintage patterns are so small. And some people say, oh, well, because people were smaller, which is true to some extent. But it's also true that the ones that are larger may have just been used more often. And so what we see is the survival bias, that the smaller size, just like today when you're in a thrift store, it seems like everything's extra, extra small because the more popular sizes get picked over faster.
Yeah, that's true. So,
and
so that's pretty much it. If you have any questions, we have a couple.
Tracy says there are 2 different categories to list them under. What do you suggest? Honestly, categories I think are less important than they used to be on eBay, so I wouldn't stress about it too much, and just make sure that you have all the right keywords that in your title and in your description, so people will find what they want to by searching.
I do list the vintage under vintage, collectible, and then but even if you list the vintage under the regular, they'll find them if you have the right keywords and item specifics.
And Sabrina, the bell-bottom pants and peasant shirts are back in style, so this might be the right time to list some of those patterns. So, as usual, we went way over an hour already. And I think that was a ton of information. It sounds like from a bunch of you in the chat, this has already been super helpful, so I'm so happy to hear that. And if you have any more questions, feel free to message us or ask us in the comments of this video. If you're watching this later, especially, please, feel free to comment with your questions and we will try to answer all of them. So we would love to hear from you. And we have a couple more segments as usual.
Do you want to just pick a couple of these news stories that we were going
to? Yeah, so we actually have a ton. We had a ton of news stories that we wanted to talk about.
Let's talk about like one or two of them.
Yeah, I think we should do a happy sewing note. Well, I'm not sure if happy. It's less sad. Let's just say that. Thank you, everyone, saying thumbs up for great content. Yes, please thumbs up this video. Share it with your friends.
Please.
Definitely. So, oops, I'm not sure where they went. So this is.
I mute myself and I deleted myself instead.
Did we talk about cut versus uncut? Yes, we did. So again, just real quick recap, uncut is generally better, but cut is not a deal breaker. So you can still sell a vintage pattern if it's already been cut. So one trend that I wanted to talk about, which I'm not sure if 2 examples is enough to call the trend, but I just thought was really interesting that we saw these back to back. So Nadine sent me this article that is from Vogue about the brand Reese Cooper in the middle of the pandemic when it's harder to, for people to shop in store and stuff, actually started selling a sewing kit so that you can make your own jacket at home. And I did look up these kits. They're all sold out, which I think, either speaks to their rarity or their popularity or both. And then I'd also heard that the brand, sorry, my computer is really slow. Elizabeth Suzanne is unfortunately closing. So, that is not happy news, but that in the blog post she posted announcing the closure, she did mention that one of the possible ways forward for her to not completely abandon the brand is to create kits. So to, provide the pattern and the materials to basically make one of her garments, but yourself at home. And I'm really curious to see if this is something that's maybe something that continues, because it is so hard to make a profitable, sustainable fashion brand. And the best way to do it might be to sell all the pieces and then have the person who wears the garment actually make it themselves at home. So if that is something that happens, we could see this as, an uptick in general in sewing and in looking for notions and patterns. And it may just be that as people return to a desire for more sustainable and less fast fashion clothing, that comes with a huge uptick in home sewing again. So
yep, definitely.
And we have we can do a quick market report, and then we'll let you guys go.
And we're going to talk about what we're doing next week too.
Yes.
So,
okay, I think I'm actually at first this time.
Okay.
So this is a story of something I used to pick up all the time that I may stop doing. This was new with tags, 100% rayon, maxi dress. So it had kind of like all the great points of a great 90s, like ditzy floral dress. And I finally sold it for $10 after having it. I was thinking about relisting it, but when someone bought it, I was just kind of relieved. And they did buy it outright. So I had dropped it down to 10. I can't believe it was that low. It just sat forever. So I'm glad it will get some wear this spring.
You have this listed on eBay too. I'm wondering this would be something that would sell better on Depop, eBay, or Etsy than Posh.
I probably should have done that. You're right. I think I did have it on eBay for a while, and then I took it down because I was going to read it.
I'm wondering if it would have done well on Depop, like, because it kind of has that grunge.
Yes, it does.
Maybe using that as a keyword would have helped. But still, you know, it is what it is.
And then this was a pretty decent sale. I took an offer. I think I had it listed for 40, took an offer of 30. This is a fairly high-end brand, but this item had a couple small flaws, which, you know, for a high-end brand can be a bit of a deal breaker. And I think it's only half of a two-piece set. I couldn't find this exact item, but for this brand, all of the tops I could find that were similar to this had a matching skirt. And so I don't think that the value was as high as I had been hoping when I first found it and knew this is definitely a Bolo brand. But this is a Bolo brand, so I would pick it up again. And I think
it's still a decent return, yeah. And what did you pay for it?
I think I paid like $3 for it.
Yeah.
So, you know, not bad at all, really.
Okay, so here's one tying into today. This is the one I just shipped yesterday. So this was, a friend of mine had given me some patterns, a bunch of patterns. And so this was in one of the lot that she had given me, and it didn't sell for $14.99. I took a best offer for $9.99, but I did pay nothing for it plus shipping. And that went out yesterday. So, and the other thing is I did forget to put the pattern number on here. That's one of the, after all we've talked about, I couldn't believe it when I looked at it. I was like, wait a minute, but it's still sold. So, but yeah, that probably would have helped. So, and then this is a vintage 70s Avenue. So Young Dimensions was kind of like a junior's line, and it was crazy disco shirt. It was really tiny. It was a size small, but it had, I'd put the measurements in there. It was a tiny small, and there's the tag. I put a larger pic so you could see what the tag looked like. So I paid $3.99. I sold that for $49.99 plus shipping. So,
awesome sale.
Yeah, that was a pretty good sale.
And so we do have a note for next week. Do you want to introduce our show?
Okay, so we're just going to be talking about 10 of our best shipping tips for resellers. 10 things that we really, that we think are, kind of standout shipping tips to help you to get a better, to ship well and to get a better, feedback on the other end when a buyer sees how carefully you package things. So.
And as always, we have a question for
also some money saving tips there too for sellers. So
absolutely.
Do you have that art for the shipping?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay. That's okay.
Nice. So we're curious, for all of you, do you have better luck at estate sales or thrift stores when sourcing for vintage patterns? So let us know your experience in the comments down below. And again, if you have any questions or if you have any bolos, scores to share that are sewing pattern related, we would love to hear all of that. Okay. And you can find us all over the internet on Poshmark, Depop, and eBay. And on Instagram, we are Thrifting and Lola Thrifts. So you can always, follow us, message us there if you have any questions. or contact us via email at nalothrifts@gmail.com.
Yes. And I did just send you that art. I don't know if you can pop it up.
Yeah, I got it. Okay.
Okay. So yeah, so that's going to be next Friday on the 22nd, same time, 12 p.m. Eastern and 9 a.m. Pacific time.
So yeah, our best shipping tips.
Yeah.
And if you have anything that you want to contribute that works for you that you think we should talk about too, again, we're always open to ideas and feedback and constructive criticism. So, we love to hear from you no matter what it is. Let us know.
Yes, definitely. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Have a great week, and we will be back next week. On that note, I think it's time for me to end. Bye.
Bye.